Hello, everybody, and welcome to A Real Point of View here on our YouTube channel. We're just coming off of our weekly program on Blog Talk Radio talking about the enemy of my enemy is my enemy. So that's our subject for this evening's after show. And so we'll just kind of give you kind of the highlights of what we've talked about so far. The movie that I chose as my primary film is Wesley Snipes in the movie Blade 2. It is a trilogy of films about a vampire hunter who is half vampire, half human. And the second movie talks about what Blade's ability to work together in this second movie, where the vampires solicit him to help them get rid of their enemy. The vampires are no longer at the top of the food chain, and now there's another entity that's far worse than they are that's killing vampires, and eventually when there's no vampires, the next thing left are humans. So they come to Blade and say, hey, we need your help, and what can you do to help us? And the other movie that we had talked about was Catch Me If You Can. This is a movie with Leonardo DiCaprio and Tom Hanks. And this is a movie that the movie maven, Karen D., found and presented to us on Blog Talk Radio. So without further ado, I again am your host here on A Real Point of View on YouTube and the YouTube channel. And my co-host this evening is the movie maven herself, Miss Karen D. Hey, Karen.
Hey,
Good to see you again. And so what can you tell our audience, our viewing audience here in a brief motif about Catch Me If You Can? And then we'll go to some other films that we've discovered.
Okay. Well, basically, this is based on a true story about a con man, Frank Abagnale, who before the age of 19 had managed to steal millions of dollars by passing bad checks. And he'd also was a master identity thief and had successfully impersonated an airline pilot, a doctor, and a state's attorney before, and he managed to do all this before the age of 19. Why this fits the theme of the enemy of my enemy is my enemy is because he was pursued doggedly for years and years by an FBI agent, Carl Hanratty. Tom Hanks plays the Carl Hanratty role, and of course Leonardo DiCaprio plays the titular character. And Carl Hanratty doggedly pursues Frank Abagnale and helps to get him captured in France, and he's thrown to a French prison where he almost dies. Carl Hanratty basically gets him extradited to the United States and probably saves his life. And while he's serving his prison term, the FBI starts relying on him more and more to help them solve some really problematic fraud cases that they have. And they end up offering Frank a deal. You know, you serve out the remainder of your sentence by working for us and help us solve these protracted cases, and then you can go once your sentence is up, but you'll go to work like normal people, but you'll just be working for us, but you'll really be our prisoner too. And Frank kind of reluctantly says okay, but ends up making a huge contribution and ended up working for them for over 30 years.
Now, there's something with regard to this particular story that you're discussing here regarding this film that you were able to witness personally. What's your personal connection to the film?
Oh, okay, yes. Well, in my day job, I work on economic crimes issues, identity theft issues, counterfeit issues, those, and just fraud type issues. And I was at a meeting on economic crimes issues, and one of the speakers was the real Frank Abagnale Jr. And he talked about he was talking about trends in economic crimes, but as part of that, he also talked about what happened what happened with this movie. And he said that a lot of it was true. Like 80% of this movie was actually true, which is a really, I mentioned on our radio broadcast, this is a very highly true to the story movie, because most based on true story movies take a lot of liberties.
Mm-hmm.
This one really limited it. I mean, there were some liberties obviously taken, but it was really, they were very judicious. And Steven Spielberg is the director, you know, I'm sure made sure of that. The book was based on, I mean, the movie was based on a book that Frank Abagnale wrote about his life as a criminal. And it was really interesting hearing him talk about his life when he did that, the horrors of being in the French prison, and but also when he was impersonating all these people and living, you know, acquiring literally millions of dollars. There wasn't much joy connected with that. He was extremely lonely. He, you know, was in constant fear of being caught, which meant he couldn't form any real connections with people that he came across.
Mm-hmm.
And so he ended up forming this sort of odd friendship with Carl Hanratty, the FBI agent, because he knew who he really was. So they actually had a basis for a friendship there, which was really odd since he was the crook and Carl Hanratty was law enforcement. But they had this odd friendship because they had things in common. Carl Hanratty was divorced. Frank Abagnale was a child of divorce. They were kind of estranged from their families, and so they kind of understood each other. And Frank, you know, really wanted to be able to talk to somebody who actually knew who he was. That was Carl Hanratty. So, and then he became and still is one of the greatest assets that the FBI has in working on really difficult to solve economic fraud cases. And now he works on multi-million-dollar fraud cases. So,
you know, I've always found it very interesting when we talk about law enforcement and crime, and find out that in many cases, a lot of law enforcement people and have so much in common. There was a turn of the switch, or go back in time, where these people could have switched places. We find that to happen quite often, and you know, many cases where a particular felon is being pursued, people who are similar in scope ironically, are the people that are involved, and the people that usually are paramount in trying to bring down and bring in these criminals. And so that's another scenario, true to life situation, where that is the case. Guys who are similar in many aspects. One is the one who goes out to bring the other one in. It makes sense. They're a better profiler than other people because of the similarities and the maybe just the way that they think about things.
right.
So I've always thought that was kind of interesting.
Right.
Well, we've got a few more movies we'd like to talk about, ladies and gentlemen. So Karen, you had another film that was your second tier film. So what is that film, and why'd you pick it?
Well, my second tier film was In the Heat of the Night.
Now, this is with Sidney Poitier, right?
Yes, this is the movie In the Heat of the Night with Sidney Poitier, Rod Steiger. It was directed by Norman Jewison. It's still in my mind. We've talked about this movie before on this show. It was released in 1967. It's one of the best movies in America's cinema. It's a 58-year-old movie. No, it's a 48-year-old movie. And I think it still stands the test of time. And it resonates today in a lot of ways, unfortunately, in some ways. and in many of the same ways that resonated in 1967.
Mm-hmm.
But basically what we have here is a Philadelphia detective who's in, I think it's Mississippi, or it's just a southern town. Who knows what state it's in? But anyway, some southern town. And he's there. This detective is there visiting his family. Who, that's where his family is. So he's there visiting his family. There's this horrible murder that happens of a very high-profile man. In fact, a wealthy man who was building a factory in this town that was going to create all these jobs where white and black people would be eligible for hiring.
Mm-hmm.
So this man gets killed, and the sheriff of the town, who's played by Rod Steiger, he plays Gillespie, the sheriff. And so Gillespie gets all this political pressure to get this crime solved and get it solved fast.
Mm-hmm.
The widow of the poor man who gets killed says something like, well, if you don't solve this crime, I'm packing my husband's money, I'm taking his bats and balls, and we're going somewhere else. So you can kiss this factory goodbye, and all those jobs and all that money and all that tax revenue, kiss it goodbye. So the mayor's freaked out, the governor's freaked out, everybody's freaked out, and Gillespie's got to get this thing solved. So, but he's also a racist. I mean, he's a racist man. He's in a racist town. It's the freaking South in the 60s. So
can I interject something quickly?
Okay.
Something that I observed in the film, and from what you're talking about, Gillespie, the irony is that the people who had come to the town to build the person who was murdered, they're from the North. They didn't like them either.
Right. No, they weren't. No, they were like considered carpetbaggers.
Yeah.
Right.
Just throwing that out there.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, it's very Civil War like. It's like the Capulets and the Montagues, but it's the Confederates and the Yankees.
Yeah.
All over again. So yeah, and when Gillespie's getting all this pressure and he keeps running up against roadblocks and trying to get this crime solved, he sort of kind of has to, against everything that he wants to do, he kind of has to talk with Virgil Tibbs. Virgil Tibbs has become very, I mean, famous is the wrong word, but he's well known and well respected for his forensic abilities. And in the 1960s, forensic science was in its infancy. Right. So using those sorts of principles to try to solve crimes, using scientific methods to solve crimes, way beyond Gillespie's wheelhouse. Right. And that's what Virgil Tibbs brings to the table, and that's exactly what they need to get this crime solved. So he kind of, it's like, oh, I need you. And he kind of ropes Virgil Tibbs into working with him, because Virgil Tibbs doesn't want to work with him either. He's like, man, I got to get out of here. And I've got to get back to the North, where people understand that they call me Mr. Tibbs, kind of thing. And he's like, and Gillespie ropes him into having to stay. And so they they kind of have to work together. And one of the things that sticks in my craw, that has always stuck in my craw about this movie, but I've been thinking about it and it doesn't stick in my craw quite so much anymore. This movie was nominated for Best Picture. Rod Steiger won Best, I think he won Best Actor. Did he? Yes. Rod Steiger won Best Actor in a Leading Role. It won Best Writing Screenplay based on material from another medium. Sterling Silliphant won for that. He was the screenwriter. Won Best Film Editing, Best Sound. It won Best Picture. So this is a really terrific film, and it always stuck in my craw that Sidney Poitier did not. I'm not even sure that he was nominated for Best Actor. I don't think he was, and certainly he certainly didn't win. He certainly didn't win anything. And
Hmm.
it's like, why is that? He was nominated for a Golden Globe, but he did not win an Academy Award. It's like, why is that? But thinking about it for this week's show, it's like, thinking about Sidney Poitier's character Virgil Tibbs versus Chief Gillespie, played by Rod Steiger. And I think what I didn't account for is, although they were both did incredibly well in those roles, the character, Rod Steiger's character, had to make a longer journey to get to the point of mutual respect to Sidney Poitier. Sidney Poitier's character did not have to make that long a journey, because part and parcel of being a black man in the South is that you have to respect the white man, because if you don't, you could end up dead. Um, so I mean, they both had to come to an understanding, but Steiger had to come from way over here to there, and Sidney Poitier had to maybe come like maybe 70% as far. Um, anyway, they and then over, because they're in a really heightened situation, and people are after Sidney Poitier, and Rod Steiger saves his butt on more than one occasion. And Virgil Tibbs really helps out Rod Steiger by helping him get this case solved. And they both see that there's more that brings them together than that separates them.
Hmm.
And Sidney Poitier finds some humor in that, which Rod Steiger can't help respecting. And Sidney Poitier is just so intelligent. And Rod Steiger is also intelligent, and he's surrounded by bumbling fools. And
Right.
he doesn't suffer fools gladly. He doesn't suffer fools lightly. The only person who's a real asset is the one person who he doesn't want to be an asset. So watching this sort of shift out of necessity from this, I can't, you're a piece, I hate you back,
Hmm.
screw you and the horse you rode in on, to, wow, I really respect you. Wow, I really respect you back. Watching that shift is, to me, fascinating. And it's just so well done. The acting is pristine in this movie, and not just from the two leads, but from people like Warren Oates, who played one of the police detectives. And I'm trying to think of who. Of course, I had my the IMDb page, and of course it went away. But
Well, can I interject
Lee Grant
something?
was also in the. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I love Lee Grant. Can I interject two things?
Sure.
One of the things goes back to what you were talking about with regard to the relationship between Sidney Poitier's character and Rod Steiger's character, and how Rod Steiger had to come from a longer way to get to that mode. I realized that part of the reason why it wasn't quite as hard for Sidney Poitier, other than what you mentioned about black people in the South at the time, but also he's in Philadelphia. He's working with all ethnicities. So it's not as hard for him to work with someone who's white, who he has to work with side by side in Philadelphia. But he understands the reality of the South, is why he wasn't so happy to do it in the South. So I think that goes along with what you were saying, him, Tibbs not having to come so far. The other thing I wanted to mention, going back to Blade, that piggybacking off of something that you mentioned here, Karen, um, is once Blade did get with the vampires to fight this foe, there was a relationship that started to develop between one of the vampires and Blade, a female vampire, of course, but she was part of the hierarchy, and she was also one of the people trained to try to fight him. And so you see that the letting down of the guard to come together to fight the foe, but also to understand each other. And I think you made a good point with regard to Rod Steiger and Sidney Poitier's character, and it just reminded me that was occurring actually in the film that I mentioned too. So
Mm-hmm.
very cool.
Yeah, and let me just mention too, I was saying that there were just so many great performances, but not just from the two stars, but also, you know, Warren Oates, Lee Grant, but William Shallard, who was in the Patty Duke show and played that, you know, that the nicest father in television, was the racist mayor in the Heat of the Night, and B. Richards, who was Mama Calaba. Just, you know, amazing actors and wonderful writing and brilliant direction from Norman Jewison. It's just an amazing film. It's really a treasure of American cinema.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite films, and I believe that's a part of a trilogy as well. So they kept making other films. The other one
Yeah,
was, I believe, they call me Mr. Tibbs, and I think the
and
third one,
the
the
organization.
organization, right? So
Unfortunately, the following films weren't nearly as good as the first film.
it's hard to do that, but still viable enough that they wanted to. So to give a little bit more credence to Mr. Tibbs, we'll say.
Right.
Well, you had mentioned the Civil War between the North and the South. Well, that's poignant with regard to my film because my next film having to do with The Enemy of My Enemy is My Enemy was a movie that came out in 1969 and it's called The Undefeated. This is a John Wayne film. I am a fan of John Wayne movies. I just like westerns, and some of John Wayne's westerns are some of the better ones. And this was not a bad film. I liked the majority of this film. The ending I didn't really like very much, but it doesn't really take away from the true essence of the film too much. And so the film as a whole is a really good film to watch. So in this particular situation, we have recently retired John Wayne, who was a colonel in the Union Army, i.e., your Yankees, Karen. And we have Rock Hudson, who is also a colonel, and he is a former colonel of a Confederate, uh, the Confederate side of the war. And so they come across each other's paths going to Mexico or in Mexico, trying to get to the emperor. John Wayne is herding um, horses for the Imperial Army, and Rock Hudson's group is going there to become part of the landscape in Mexico and being wooed by the emperor, I think, for military strategy. And so they go in their Confederate garb, actually, even though the war between the states is over, only a few months over. But the way this fits into the scenario for our uh, our theme tonight is the Union soldiers were fighting the Confederate soldiers, so they were enemies. Sadly, coming from the same country, fighting each other civilly in this war, and they come together in Mexico to fight the French because the French want those horses, and because of John Wayne's character trying to come to the aid of Rock Hudson's character, those horses had to go to the revolutionaries. And so you find that in order to get those horses there, the Confederate soldiers and the Union, former Confederate soldiers and the former Union soldiers have to work together when they didn't like each other at all. But it's their commonality and their sheer will to do the right thing that
Mm-hmm.
brings them together in this film. And it's a really good movie, a decent storyline. Uh, like I said, I alluded to earlier, I didn't like the ending. I think the ending could have gone. Um, it's like they decided to end the movie,
Oh,
and I
they
thought
got
that was,
tired.
yeah. It's like I thought that was not good enough. As you're getting toward the end, it seemed like it was going to really get into a little bit more viability, but it really it tailed off too quickly and in a way that seemed a little it wasn't. It was unsettled still, and things needed to be done. But other than that, up to that point, it was really a good movie, and I enjoyed the film.
Awesome. Awesome. So say some more about the relationship between John Wayne and Rock Hudson.
Well, one of the things they had in common initially was their rank. Both were colonels. The difference is that Rock Hudson's character was a colonel, was in the military, and became a colonel, and he was leading not just guys that soldiers that were living in the same county and area that he lived in, but just a massive amount of troops from different areas. In John Wayne's case, John Wayne wasn't a military man. He actually volunteered to be uh, in the United States Army, and he said he would bring 75 really good horse riders to the Union Army. And so horses was the big deal for him because these are guys that were raised around horses. And everyone who has any knowledge about the Civil War, the cavalry was a big deal. They didn't have tanks and jeeps and anything like that. So the cavalry was how they got around, and they could actually attack quickly on horseback. And um, so John Wayne was a leader of that band, and they volunteered. And so John Wayne was given the rank of colonel. He didn't have to work for it as much. So that is one of the differences. But the commonality was they're both colonels, both a leaders of men. And the irony was during their the time when they were officers in the army, they came across each other unknowingly in battle,
Oh,
and so
okay.
they had that in common. There were other battles where members of the family of Rock Hudson's family, his sister-in-law, lost her husband in a battle that was a charge that John Wayne led, his character led. And so he was sadly the person who led the charge that killed her husband. But here was something I thought was really interesting in the movie. John Wayne um, was at the camp of the Confederate camp, talking to them civilly about something, and they were attacked by some Mexican bandoleros who were surrounding this wagon train of Confederate soldiers and their wives. And he was in conversation with Rock Hudson's sister-in-law, and he apologized because after talking to Rock Hudson, realized that his sister-in-law, because he said he lost his brother at that in that fight, and this was his brother's wife. And he very politely and very humanely spoke to her about the issue, and it really endeared him to her. And we find out that indirectly, they've started to strike a kind of a romantic, because these days romance wasn't out front; it was inferred or uh, subtle. And so you see the
Mhm.
subtle relationship between he and the sister-in-law that goes from that point through the rest of the film. Um, Other things they had in common was how they viewed life. You find that they were both gentlemen. You find that um, they both respected their men that they led very much so. That decisions that were made in the latter part of the film, John Wayne didn't say, "Well, we're going to do this." He said, "What do you guys think? How do you feel?" And the same thing was happening a little bit on Rock Hudson's side. Um, Rock Hudson was forced into a lot of situations in this film that he normally wouldn't have to deal with. And instead of blowing up and being forceful, he and John Wayne talked it stuff. They talked, excuse me, they talked, thank you. They talked things out and got things settled and understood. It was probably one of the better um, collaborations between two enemies or two former enemies that you'd ever want to see in film.
Mhm.
So much so that they not only were working together, they started to like each other. And by the end of the film, everybody's liking everybody, which goes toward the essence of the propaganda, essence of, after this civil war where we fought each other, we realized we were not just fighting each other that lived in the same country. We're fighting cousins and other relatives, aunts and uncles, whose decisions, whose views were different.
Right.
And so we came together like families do after a fight. It's not something that's forever. And I think they were trying to imply, we've come together. Let's be together. Let's stay together. Let's work together. We're not so different, and that's what this movie really says a lot in this film.
Mm-hmm.
And even the well, I'm just going to give you one scenario in the film, not trying to be a spoiler. In the early part of the film, John Wayne's troops, during the war, are trying to attack this ridge where the Confederate army is kind of bunked in, and so they bombard them with cannonball fire, and then they charge, and they are successful in breaking the defenses and getting over there. And so instead of just going crazy slaughtering everybody, after they realize that the Confederate army is basically had it, they sound the bugle. They stop what they're doing. And as this is happening, a Union courier rides up behind the Union army and catches up to John Wayne's character, the colonel, and lets him know that the war was over. And so John Wayne asked, well, when did you find out? He said, we just found out, but it's been over for 3 days. So he didn't have to attack. And so his first thing is to go apologize to the officers who they attacked. And they go to the Confederate officer who's in charge, because a lot of them were dead, so the guy who was left pretty much. And he says to him, I really apologize what happened. We didn't know that the war was over. Did you know that the war was over? We just got word that the war is over. He was apologizing, and he came to report that the war is over. And the Confederate soldier said, yeah, we've known for 2 days. And he said, well, why would you fight then? I mean, what? We could have avoided all this. He said, because as far as we're concerned, the war is not over.
Oh, yeah, well, welcome to the South, son.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. He said, but the officer said, but we appreciate the fact that you came and told us, and we appreciate the fact that you were gentlemen. And that's how it ended. And so they left because, they had won the day, so it wasn't like the Confederates had anything to do but regroup. That was really interesting to me. It's like the war is over, and it didn't matter because as far as they were concerned, what they were fighting for, they were still fighting for it. It was pretty interesting. Mm-hmm. So I thought it was a pretty decent movie. And I think it has a lot of points in it that are poignant, just like The Heat of the Night, that are poignant today. Mm-hmm. And we can look at as ways to communicate, ways to come together for solutions, and ways to continue to strive for betterment later on, even after that situation has dissipated. So you have one more film, Karen. What other film did you have that we can get into before we get out of here?
Yeah, the other film is Trading Places, because I thought, it might be nice to bring in a really well done comedy that also tracks the same theme. And Trading Places, again, I would also put this among like one of a really great example of comedy, and it has a heck of a pedigree. Like I said on the radio portion of our program, this movie came out in 1983. It was directed by John Landis, who is a master of comedic filmmaking. Timothy Harris and Herschel Weingrod wrote the movie. It stars Eddie Murphy, Dan Aykroyd, comedic geniuses, both of them. But not they, again, like, because we're talking about pedigree, we also have Don Amici, who's I mean, he was like one of the ultimate film matinee idols of the 30s and 40s, and he was wonderful in this movie. And Ralph Bellamy, another matinee idol type, who from the early days of film, who was terrific in this movie. And Jamie Lee Curtis was awesome as the prostitute turned like ally of both Billy Ray Valentine, as Eddie Murphy's character, and Louis Winthorpe, which is Dan Aykroyd's character. And basically, you were talking about this. You have enemies coming together because they realize that there's more that unites them than really separates them. And you have that kind of theme also in this movie. You have people who could not be more different. Billy Ray Valentine is basically this homeless sort of huckster who pretends to be blind and crippled. He's neither, but he pretends to be blind and crippled to get money from people. And then, of course, he's trying to hit on women while he's doing all that, So the opening scene of the film, where he's like on this like little pegboard with wheels because he's not supposed to have legs, and he's got like a hoodie and a really tattered coat or whatever, and he's pretending to be blind, and then he's trying to hit on this woman and telling her that they could make it. And I'm like, make it with what? You have nothing. Why are you hitting on women? And she's like, are you kidding me? Of course, she's very well dressed and looks fabulous, and he's like, you and me, baby, we can make it. Okay, no, but anyway, so you've got him, and then you've got Louis Winthorpe, who was born with the ultimate silver spoon, I mean gold, spoon in his mouth, who is, puffy and soft and well manicured and well spoken and just, the best of everything, and he's very, very wealthy. And just can't be bothered with the dregs of society. I mean, it's just, that's just stuff you give a check to through your charity, but you don't ever talk to them. Right. So, so way like worlds apart, right? But they end up coming together because Louis Winthorpe's mentors in his investment banking firm are actually really asinine, horrible people who like to manipulate and play with people's lives. And so they screw over Louis Winthorpe, not because they don't like him, not because they have something against him. He's made them millions of dollars, but they just feel like messing around with people. So they mess around with him. He was just messable. He was there, and they decide to use, in a rather cruel twist, they decide to use Billy Ray Valentine to really literally pull the rug out from under Louis Winthorpe by basically stripping him of everything that he identifies as being his life. He loses his job. He loses his fiance. He becomes a criminal. He's pursued by law enforcement. He has no money. He has no food. I mean, everything, and which is really cruel. And they were doing this for sport. And when towards the middle of the movie, Billy Ray Valentine realizes what's really going on.
Excuse me.
And he sort of, at great risk to his own personal safety, reaches out to Louis Winthorpe to say, hey, listen, we're not the problem here. We have a much bigger problem that we need to work together to solve. And our problem is your bosses. They're the problem, And so we need to take them to the cleaners. We need to teach them a major lesson. And, so that's how they come together. And of course they realize that there's far more. Billy Ray Valentine is just as smart as Louis Winthorpe.
Right.
He either didn't have, or he ignored the opportunities that were presented to him to use his intelligence, but he has the intelligence. He's really good at financial management and, figuring out commodities and exchanges and all that other stuff. And Louis Winthorpe is like that too. but Lewis Winthorpe also has like a really, he develops an innate sense of fairness, and comes to understand that these structures of class and race don't mean anything.
Right.
And when you're faced, when you're in a situation where you're literally stripped of everything that you know and identify to be your life, you realize that those artifices are such a waste of time. Mm-hmm. So that was his realization. And Billy Ray Valentine, I guess, you know, he was in a situation where he went from not having much to having everything at his disposal. Mm-hmm. And his character found that to be a rather empty experience because he was still a pawn. So right. It's like, even if you have all the money in the world, if you're a pawn, it ain't cool to have all that doesn't buy you what you need, which is self-respect and, you know, integrity, and being able to look at yourself in the mirror in the morning and feeling like your existence matters. And he saw that with all that money, his existence still didn't matter unless he did something to help somebody else other than himself. So, and that was something that the Dukes, the characters played by Don Amici and Ralph Bellamy, they had no clue about that, you know. So, but again, you know, those are the underlying, to me, those are some of the underlying lessons of the movie, but all sort of encapsulated in this brilliant comedy. Just great lines back and forth, and lovely interplay between not only Billy Ray and Lewis Winthorpe, but also the Dukes, Don Amici and Ralph Bellamy as the brothers. And another real jewel in this movie is Denholm Elliott, who plays the butler to Lewis Winthorpe, and then Billy Ray Valentine. But he's sort of like this undercover agent, you know. He sort of does what he is told to do because he kind of has to, but he's the one who really has a sense of fair play because he's the butler. He sees everything. He knows how creepy the Dukes are, and he knows what a patsy Lewis Winthorpe has been, and he knows all this stuff, and he just sort of does this undercover stuff to kind of guide people towards like the right direction. And then Jamie Lee Curtis was really awesome too. Just really, I mean, she played, I mean, in a lot of ways, her character was sort of stereotyping. I mean, she was a prostitute. What else is new, you know? But, you know, really street smart, and but also, you know, a really innate sense of fair play and a really very well defined bull meter, you know. So she's like, you know, especially with Lewis Winthorpe, it's like, you're not playing any games with me at all. You know, you can stay here, but you need to make a contribution. You need to do this, that, and the other thing. And I'm not your mommy. So no, it's either a partnership or you need to move along. You know, so even though her character was within these rather sort of, you know, stereotypical confines, there was still like she made it interesting, and there was enough there outside of those confines to make watching her really interesting. So very, very well done, and just a really funny movie. Al Franken and Tom Davis were also in this movie in a small part. Again, hilarious, just hilarious.
You know, it's interesting because going back to the butler, he was the glue that kept it together.
Yes, he was.
He was. And Jamie Lee Curtis's character really was the compassionate one. Without her compassion, they wouldn't have gotten that far.
Right.
So we have those two really pulling it together. They were both the glue that kept these major entities together long enough and strong enough to really pull off what they were trying to pull off in the latter part of the film. So
Right.
one of my favorite films too.
It was the Dukes. It was the Dukes.
Right. Billy Ray gasping for air.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Yeah,
Oh,
that
yeah.
was
It was
hilarious.
right. Right. It
And I
was. It's.
and I thought up to that point, especially that Dan Aykroyd really did a really good job
Oh,
of
he did.
being preyed upon throughout this movie, all the way to the
Right.
point where he could not take it anymore. He just
Right.
couldn't take it anymore. And sadly, Billy Ray's throat was the only thing he could latch onto.
Right.
So
Right.
it was pretty funny. But
Well, he'd already committed assault with a deadly weapon and theft and all kinds of stuff, and he'd become a slob and didn't know how to bathe, and it's like, oh my goodness, it was
and this was not your average everyday run of the mill Macy's Santa Claus either.
no, no, no. He just fell apart. Oh my goodness,
Totally. And
totally fell apart.
it was so interesting to watch Eddie Murphy's expressions when he realizes that he's being duped too.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, wait a minute, no, this is
Yep.
not, we're not letting this continue.
Yeah, no, no wonder they were offering me all this, all this stuff. I mean, it looks like the fatted calf, and then it's like, wait, whoa, back it up.
Mhm.
There's a huge cost that comes with this fatted calf that I am not paying.
And it was really the fatted pork belly,
Yeah,
not
it
the
was the
cat.
fatted pork belly. You know what I mean.
But yeah, I agree. This was a stellar film. I think I've seen Trading Places about 4 times,
I've seen it at least 4 times, if not more.
and
If not
so
more.
I think what happens is when you come across films like these that we've spoken about today, you find yourself going back and trying to find that extra thing, or trying to relive the emotion that you had the first time you watched it. And I find myself, I remember seeing The Undefeated when I was younger, but I hadn't seen it for many years, and it was really good to see it again. And same thing
Mhm.
with Blade. I own the trilogy on DVD, and um, I hadn't gone back to see them. And I'm a big Marvel guy, so Blade was part of that Marvel universe for me. And
Mhm.
Catch Me If You Can wasn't a huge movie on my radar, but I had seen it, and I thought it was pretty good. And of course, I am a Tom Hanks fan, so it's like I'm like you. It's hard for him to do wrong on his own. He always has help. So, but as an actor, I think he's pretty darn good. So,
Yeah. And I think the other thing too that I was gonna mention, there was something else I was gonna mention, and I just lost what it was. Um, I lost what it was. Never mind.
well, just to help, we were talking about Tom Hanks and his ability, his acting ability. Um, I remember Tom Hanks on a sitcom. I can't remember what
Yes,
it was,
bosom
but
buddies.
Bosom Buddies. I thought that was a pretty decent show. That
Peter
was
Scolari played the other guy.
right, and he's also a decent actor as well. But that's what got Tom Hanks on my radar, and he's never left. He's like you said, he's been in some movies that weren't so great, but it wasn't because of him.
Right.
And but the ones that are great because of him, even that much more. I loved him in Saving Private Ryan. I loved him in The Green Mile. I loved him in Forrest Gump.
I
Um,
loved him in Apollo 13.
I really liked him in Apollo 13.
I can watch that movie over and over and over again.
And I think it's kind of funny because I think when as people look at certain genres or categories or whatever you want to call it, subject matter, that's probably better, in film, watching the Apollo, watching the space, that's not your biggest, um, like Gravity. Those are not your biggest. Oh yeah, I really want to go see that. But fortunately for these films, they were produced really well, and the marketing for these films are really good to get you to watch them. But then when you watch them, you realize that these are really, really, really good and well done films, and it takes that apprehension off of these films. And so now after watching Apollo 13, I don't have as much of a what's the word I'm looking for? Um, well, apprehension, I guess, is a good word. I'm not as apprehensive about seeing other films of similar ilk. So
Yeah.
yeah, so yep, and partially because of Tom Hanks, he did a stellar job, and so did a lot of the other actors in the film too, Kevin
Well,
Bacon
Gary
and Gary
Sinise
Sinise.
and
Yeah, I mean
Kevin
we could,
Bacon's
yeah
lovely.
we
Bill Paxton,
yeah and
Ed Harris.
I love all of them separately.
Hmm.
So to have them all in
Yeah.
one film was great.
And also, I mean, to me, I guess I can watch that movie over and over again because, for one, I remember Apollo 13. I mean, I was a kid. I was not a very old child at all, and I don't really remember specifically that much about that, but I just remember, I mean, when we were growing up in our household, the space flights they were on our television.
Right,
News reports about, we watched them. And I still remember this to this day extremely vividly, the moon landing, for example. I know I'm dating myself, but I do. I remember that. That's like that's like seared on my brain, as it is for most people who actually saw the moon, saw it on television. But I also kind of remember that by the time Apollo 13 came around, there was this just sort of like almost imperceptible national fatigue about space flight.
right,
And it's not, it's like, oh, okay, well, I mean, it's like after winning it's like you win the Academy Award, and then what do you do? Well, after the moon landing, unless you've got another planet up your sleeve, what are you going to do? In
right,
Apollo 13, it was, this, you know, effort to catch lightning in a bottle twice, go back to the moon, because there was like this whole succession of astronauts who wanted the chance to get to the moon, and Neil Armstrong and Jim Lovell had the chance to do it. Not Jim Lovell, Buzz Aldrin. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin had the chance to be on the moon, but there were all these other astronauts in training specifically for that honor who wanted the chance to be on the moon, or some planet, a planet, if not the moon, then a planet, Mars, Venus, Mercury, whatever. But that wasn't likely. So the moon's the best we got. And the things that were brought out about the way in which the flight was managed and the politics involved and stuff like that, I just thought was so poignant. And the courage of these men and how they all almost died. And we had situations where astronauts had died before that
mm-hmm.
mission.
Right.
One of them was somebody that our mom knew, Greg. Um, so that movie just kind of has like a little special place in my heart. But for me, I like movies about space. Some of my favorite movies are about what happens to people when they go into space, or the quest to get into space. They just kind of grab me the way that swashbuckling movies do, and pirate movies do, and space movies grab me too.
Well, I'm with you on the swashbuckling movies and the pirate movies and westerns, and they grab me too. And we're talking way back into the 1930s. Grab me. So, well, ladies and gentlemen, that kind of concludes our enemy. The enemy of our enemy is my enemy. For this episode of A Real Point of View, we want to thank everybody for joining us. Join us again here on the YouTube channel and under A Real Point of View. And if you get an opportunity, listen to our weekly show every Friday at 11 Eastern Time. 11 p.m. Eastern Time on Blog Talk Radio at blogtalkradio.com, Gregory Morgan. And we kind of start off our show with our subject matter and take it from there to our after show here. So we want to thank you again for listening and watching, and join us again here. Check out our archives on YouTube and check out our archives on blogtalkradio.com. So everything's under Real Point of View. We really like coming to you guys talking about film. Film is our deal. So again, thanks for listening.
Questions and comments on our Twitter accounts. Don't forget.
Yeah, you can reach me, as you can see here, at Real Movie Guy, and Karen is KD Movie Maven on Twitter, and Larry Demkowski is Must See Movies on Facebook, and I'm also the Real Movie Guy on Facebook, and you can check out our Real Point of View on Facebook. We have landing pages for all of that. So comments, questions, and
ideas for future shows?
Yeah. If you have some ideas about themes that we can utilize for future shows or movies that you want us to watch, let us know. We'd love to hear from you. Okay, well, thanks, Karen, and as always, good seeing you. And we'll hopefully welcome back our third party, Mr. Larry Demkowski of Must See Movies, back with us next time. But until then, watch as many movies as you can. It's just an education, people. Take care. Good night, everybody.
See ya.